Good morning. Welcome to our class together again. Today we are in John chapter 9 as we continue our study through the Gospel of John. I wanted to show you a couple pictures to get started this morning, just to get your attention. Let's look at this one first. Now, a second one. What exactly did you see in those pictures? The reason I ask that is they're not what you think they are. What you see is not what you see. In the picture of the room that is blue, for instance, you may see a hole in the floor that goes to the bottom to the second story beneath. Would you walk across that? What if I told you that what that was, that hole, was nothing more than 3D tile placed firmly on the floor as it was? You can walk completely around that floor, over that floor, jump on that floor. You'll never fall down anywhere. But it doesn't look that way, does it? The other one is a rug that you can buy from places like Amazon. You can place it in your den and fool all your friends to think you have a hole in the ground that goes all the way through. What's fascinating about this, I saw a picture the other day of a dog who came to a rug just like this and looked at it and jumped over the middle of it because he was afraid it was a hole. Is that how you see it? It's important to know that because not all the things that we see are what we see, and all the things that are unseen are not always invisible to us. That's why today we're going to look at the case of a man who has sight problems. But it's really not the man who has sight problems. It's everybody else in the story, it seems like. They can't see what Jesus sees. So today we're in John chapter 9 and we're studying about the man born blind. First, a little bit about the miracle. It says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not this man who sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day, for the night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. He then anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. A little bit about this parable. Just think about this, or this miracle rather. Just think about this. Jesus comes upon a man, and we don't know much about him, but it appears that he doesn't even notice that Jesus is around much. He doesn't say anything to him, according to what John reports. Suddenly, Jesus spits on the ground, makes mud, rubs it in his eyes, and says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. The pool of Siloam's an interesting place. There was a reason I think Jesus sent him there. And it had no magical purposes. It had no mystical qualities, but it did have something that would trigger something in the minds of a Jew. Pool of Siloam was created by Hezekiah when the Assyrians surrounded the city of Jerusalem and tried to shut off their water supply. He dug this channel, this canal that came in, and it provided fresh water for the inhabitants of Jerusalem as they lasted through the Assyrian siege. It was a place that meant sent, but it also had great connotations that if when somebody heard Siloam, they thought of deliverance. And so it was at this special place that Jesus sends him to get water to wash his eyes, and he comes back and he can see. That's the bare framework of the miracle. But remember, John only tells us a few miracles. And the reason he tells them is they are a sign about something else. They show beyond themselves. This is not a story about a man who was healed of his blindness. There's more to it than that. And in fact, as we go through this chapter, you meet various people who have various opinions and views of what this man is. First we come to are the disciples. Now the disciples come along, and we don't know what was this, but it looks like they're just looking at this man. Maybe he was begging at the temple. Maybe he was just wandering down the street. Whatever it was, all of a sudden someone raises a question. The question is, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Notice something that they saw the man as nothing more than a theological debate to take place, a discussion. It was almost like they're going to have a discussion group. Hey, Peter, you bring the donuts, I'll bring the coffee. We'll talk about the nature of sin and how come people who seem to be so sick and so debilitated are such raw sinners. So why don't you be there at 9 o'clock tonight? Is that what they're asking? Notice something about what they said. They said that they connected this man's blindness, which was congenital, with someone's sin. You get what you deserve. If you have disease, if you have illness, if you have problems in life, it must be because you did something to deserve it. Now you say, why would anybody believe that today? But do we not? I remember in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina came and raked its ugly finger across New Orleans and left much of it decimated. There were many Christians I heard say, it is God's punishment for their sinful lifestyles. Well, maybe, maybe not. But you want to try that thinking on for size in your own life? You're driving down the road, suddenly you have a fender bender. What sin did you commit to create that situation? Or you're late for work one morning because your alarm didn't go off. What was it the day before that you did that was so wrong that caused you to be late? What sin did you commit? Suppose you go to the doctor, they find cancer. What was the ugliest sin against God that you did that caused that problem? Now, I understand there are some things that we do that bear consequences, but that's not what they're saying here. This is a man who is born blind who does that. But think about what happens if you make it personal. I have a granddaughter who has problems with her legs right now. There's a problem that happened during birth. It's not going to be bad, but it does cause difficulties for her. And there's this continuing struggle and continuing therapies that we're going to have to do. Now, if someone were to come up to me and say, what's wrong with your granddaughter? What did you do to make God so furious that he decided to afflict her? We might not have a very friendly conversation at that moment. See, but they were saying, let's turn the man into theological discussion. They didn't talk about the man and his problem. They didn't expect anything to happen. He's just one of those blind beggars that's out there like there are so many of in Jerusalem. And so let's just talk about it and not worry about his plight. But Jesus does. He gets his sight for the first time in his life. Think about what that was like for this man. He had never seen before. He had never seen his mother's face. He had never seen the glories of the temple. He had never seen a sunrise or a sunset. He had never seen the stars. Can you imagine maybe how disoriented that would be? You don't even know what world you're in anymore because suddenly you can see everything like you've never seen it before. And that prompts a whole lot of other problems. He goes back to his neighborhood, and the neighbors have difficulties. It says that the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he's not like him. He kept saying, I'm the man. So they said to them, how can your eyes have been opened? He said, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go wash in the pool of Siloam, and I washed. So I went, I washed and received my sight. And the man, so they said, well, where is he? He said, I don't know. The neighbors are confused. They don't know what to make about this man. He looks like him, but I don't see the dog in the cane anymore. Well, he's standing more erect than I remember him seeing. I don't know if that's him or not. Well, I think it is. It sure looks like him. I've known him for his whole life. Yeah, but he doesn't look the same. There are people who are confused about that. Nobody in his neighborhood believed anything was going to happen to him outside he would live and die as a blind man. There are some that they look at the world and go, huh, nothing ever happens around here. I wonder what happened. Now, the man, to his great credit, does only one thing he can do. He only tells his story. This is what happened to me. Where is Jesus? I don't know. He's going to get very familiar with that story as we keep going. Because the next stage up, the next group of people that he meets or he is forced to meet are the Jewish rulers. It says that they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees asked him again how he had received his sight, and he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I can see. What are the Pharisees doing? They're turning this into a legal issue. Jesus has violated the law. You would think that a man who had been born blind, who now can see, would be a cause for rejoicing. Can you imagine the miracle of God? This man could not see this morning, and he can see perfectly now. He's never been able to see. Praise God. Not these men. This is a Sabbath day. Nobody's supposed to be doing stuff like that on the Sabbath day. Find that man who violated the law, and we want to talk to him and upbraid him. But it was not without contention. Some of them said he can't be from God because he didn't keep the Sabbath. They had this nice little syllogism that if you keep the Sabbath, and if you're from God, you keep the Sabbath. So therefore, if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're not from God. Nice little box that they put Jesus in. Others would say, how can this man who is a sinner do such signs? If he's such a sinner, sinners don't do things like this. They can't work miracles. They can't make blind men see. And so it says, and there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And the blind man says, he is a prophet. That does not help the Pharisees. They need a round condemnation of Jesus from the man who the miracle worked on, because everybody was apparently beginning to talk. There is a man who was born blind who now can see. John continues and says, the Jews did not believe that he had been born blind and received his sight until they called his parents of the man and who had received his sight and asked him, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. Because the parents who said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, they would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore the parents said, he is of age, ask him. They haul the parents in. I don't think he was ever blind. I think this was a put-up job from the time that they started. This is a fake miracle that has been faked by a charlatan. That's what the thinking is. So they call the parents in and say, is this your son? Yes. Was he blind? Yes. From birth he was. A mother knows that. So how's he now see? And they go, we don't know. Why don't you ask him? I think it's interesting that the Pharisees If you can't get to the truth, you deny the truth. You deny the reality to live in your own fantasy. Many people, when they are confronted with the truth of the gospel, live with their fantasy. God surely didn't say that. I don't believe God is like that, even though it's portrayed very clearly what the truth is. And so for a second time, it says, they called the man who had been born blind and said to him, give the glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. And he answered, whether he is a sinner, I don't know. One thing I know, though I was blind, now I can see. And they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I've told you that already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be one of his disciples? I love the expressions there. The Pharisees are grasping at straws. They are looking for a way to hang Jesus out to dry. And so they want this man to give his opinion, because if they can get his opinion that he's not the Christ, then they can say, even the man he healed doesn't believe it. And they keep pressing. They want to know how this was done. Maybe there's an answer in the mechanisms. Maybe there's a magic trick in there. The man won't bite. I've already told you that. All I know is where I was once blind, now I can see. And if you want to know more, then maybe you're asking so you can follow him too. At that point, they just blew up. They reviled him, it says, you are his disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from. But the man answered, why? This is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered him, you were born to utter sin. Would you teach us? And they cast him out. The man is faced with a dilemma. What does he say? The Pharisee says, we listen only to Moses. And they're accusing Jesus of ignoring Moses, especially about the Sabbath day. The truth be told, Jesus kept the law of Moses in law and spirit better than anybody else. They said, we don't even know where he comes from. The man says, you're the smart folks here. You're the learned people. You're the educated, and you don't know where he comes from? I find that incredulous that people that smart can't figure this out. We've always said that sinners are not heard by God. God doesn't listen to prayers of sinners. That's what we say. And therefore, if this man did this miracle, apparently he's not a sinner because God heard him. If he's not from God, how can you explain the fact that a man who has been born blind can now see? Now, the last vestige of a dishonest man is to get angry. And that's exactly what they did. They threw him out of the temple, basically cut him off from Judaism. And so we have the disciples who see him as a theological issue to be debated. We see his neighbors who see him as an object of gossip. Who is he? What happened? I wonder what took place. And then we have the Pharisees who see this whole event not as a miracle of God, but as a way of catching Jesus so they can get rid of him. What is it? An interesting point to talk about. an interesting person to talk about, an interesting way to get rid of your enemies and create vindication and vengeance. Because you see, the last one we come to in this story is Jesus himself. I want to point out in this story, the only person who does anything for the man who is blind, the man who has been begging all of his life, the man who had the greatest need, the only one who did anything for the man was Jesus. Nobody else did a thing. So Jesus has heard that he's been dispensed out of the temple. So it says that he found him. He said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man says, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. There's an interesting thing that takes place in the Gospel of John that we have come across once or twice already, but it will come to a fulfillment at the end of the Gospel. And that's the concept of seeing and believing. Throughout the whole Gospel of John, Jesus says, "What have you seen? And what does that tell you?" And there are people who see what he does, believe in him. Here's another case of that. The man can't explain his plight. He only knows this person, this man named Jesus, is the only one who could take care of his problems of life. And so he will follow and believe because he has seen the truth. Now, as we come to as we take that story in and we try to make sense out of it for today, what do we do with it? Let me ask a series of questions. I think the first question is, what did people expect to happen in this passage? Let's assume that you go back to the very first verse and it all begins to unwind. What do you think people thought was going to take place that day? Let's talk about the disciples. What did they think was going to happen? We don't have any indication. They thought anything was going to happen. Nothing happens around here. They're with the Son of God. They're with the miracle worker, and they don't think anything can happen. Even the man, just think about when he comes to Jesus. He doesn't come with anything, with any expectation. As far as we can tell, he never even asked, "Can I be healed?" He didn't think anything could be done. After all, if you've been born blind, what can be done? You don't need to be healed. There has to be something else take place. So he has no expectation. The neighbors, when he comes back to the neighborhood, they're just astonished. It couldn't be him because he's been born blind. They don't expect anything to happen. And the Pharisees, they don't want anything to happen. He couldn't have done it because doesn't represent God. He's a sinner. So nothing's going to happen with him. And the answer to the question is, no one expected anything. There were no expectations that day. I want to, I want to ask a simple question. What do you expect God to do in our world and in your life? I'm afraid, and I have to confess to this at the same time, that we come to each and every day thinking just another day, just more, another 24 hours, be like it was yesterday, it would be like it is tomorrow, and nothing's going to happen. But you realize that Jesus does something in every life every day that we may not even notice. Do you expect him to do something? If Jesus is indeed alive today, as we believe, as the Bible testifies to, if he is indeed in control and authority of our world, as we say he is, something is happening today. Do you expect God to work in the lives of people? Perhaps one of our problems with evangelism, we don't think people can change. We don't have any expectation that Jesus can do anything with a guy like that. He only works with moral people, with the good people, not people who are really down and out. That's beyond anything. We need to have them as good moral people before God can work with them. We have no expectation. What is it you expect Jesus is going to do in your life and the lives of our world today? You never know. Next question. Who's blind and who can see? In this passage, I find it a very interesting juxtaposition. A blind man among the sighted, who seems to be able to see more than the people who can see. I like what Jesus has to say as he closes out this chapter. He comes to the Pharisees, he comes to the Jews, and he says, "For judgment I've come into the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." And some of the Pharisees hanging around near him said, "And are you saying we are also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." There's one interesting idea that runs throughout all Scripture. That is, there are people who can see perfectly with their eyes, but they cannot see with their hearts. Think about how people were blinded. Think about how the Pharisees were blinded. Think about everybody you've known, maybe even yourself. How are you blinded? We're blinded by our assumptions at times. We don't believe various things because they can't happen. They were saying a man who is born blind can never see again. That was assumption can be made. They couldn't see past their assumption. He couldn't have been born blind because if he can see now, he wasn't born blind. But if he was born blind, he can't see. That's an assumption. Good people are the only people that can come to Jesus. People who have already changed their life are the people he changes. Is that our assumption? Or can he take the worst of sinners and change them? Anybody. Sometimes we're blinded by our expectations, as I said before. We just don't see anything. We don't expect anything to happen. We never see the small nudge of God take place in our lives. So we never see what happens because it's not supposed to. Sometimes it's our background. We've been raised a certain way. We're close to it. I've met hundreds of people that way. They're good people. They're honest people. The problem is they just have blinders on, caused because of what they were taught, what was instilled in them by parents, even well-meaning parents. I don't believe there are malicious parents like this. Sometimes a person has to say, now that I have read it for myself, I know now the truth of what I need to do. Then you're freed from your blindness. One of the most oft-quoted passages in the New Testament of the Old Testament comes out of Isaiah chapter 6. Jesus says it. John says it in Revelation. And I think it's lying behind this whole chapter. Isaiah chapter 6, 9 to 10. And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand, but do not keep, do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed." When Isaiah was told that by God, go tell them this. He said, there are people who you can preach to and they'll never listen. There are people you can show and they'll never see. There are people who will never feel anything. Jesus met them. We meet them now. The one great truth is that the person who will not see is no better than the person who cannot see. We always have to ask the question, what about us? What can you do? And then finally, I think the pivotal verse of this chapter comes in John chapter 9, verses 4 to 5. As the disciples are trying to figure out what is the spiritual conundrum that caused the pain of the problems, Jesus answers, we must work the works of him who sent us while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm with you and in the world, I am the light of the world. Jesus basically repeats what he said in John chapter 7, I am the light of the world, but here in a little different way. He said, there is a day and a night. You do the work during the day. The night comes when you can't do any work, you can't see. So see while you can see. Jesus provides light to those who want to see it. That's one of the great realities of the gospel. He doesn't make you look, he doesn't make you see. He provides light if you hope to see it. But you have to open the curtains. See, the sun comes up in the morning, but if you stay in bed in a darkened room, you'll never see it. The sun is there. You just don't see it. Jesus goes on to say, but the time is fading away. So seize the opportunity. The truth for us is that there is a window in which we can see the truth before our mind goes blinded by it. I've seen too many people who let the window pass, and now they know, but they don't care. There is this window. Time is fading. While I am still here, I am the light of the world. But when the sun goes down, it's night and nothing can be done. So there's the opportunity. Do we see the light? How is your eyesight? Thank you for joining me. I'm glad we were together today. I hope you've enjoyed our class together. Next week, we'll be back again with another lesson on John chapter 10 and the Good Shepherd. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great day.